It probably won't come as a surprise when I tell you that if you hike hundreds of miles on the Appalachian Trail, there will be plenty of times when you're going to get dirty and you're not going to smell too good. So I'm going to offer some ideas designed to keep the grunginess to a minimum, to help keep ourselves clean, our gear clean, or as clean as possible, and to keep our hiking environment as clean as possible. I'm going to start with the problem that vexed me the most when I was new to the Appalachian Trail: how to clean a cook pot. The old advice tells us to rub the pot with sand or dirt and rinse it out in a stream. But sand is not going to be easy to find every day on the Appalachian Trail, and you're not going to have a handy stream every day on the Appalachian Trail either. Also, there are potential problems if we dump food, pieces of food, or watered down food onto the ground. It can attract animals. At many wooden shelters, lean-tos, and campsites along the Appalachian Trail, mice are a rampant problem. We don't want to do anything to attract any more mice that are already there. Many springs along the Appalachian Trail are nothing more than a hole in the ground with water in them. Often these springs are lined with rocks. I hope it's easy to understand why it would be a very bad idea to leave food debris in a spring or to put anything in a spring that would contaminate it. We need to keep springs clean because hikers rely on them for water. It's also not a good idea to dump food into a privy or outhouse along the Appalachian Trail. Many of these privies will carry a sign warning hikers not to do that. The privies, the shelters, the trail along the AT are maintained by nothing but volunteers, and I don't want to do anything to make their job any harder than it is. The short story is I took a tip from another hiker, and I started carrying with me a small, thin, sharp nylon scraper. But I did not use the scraper to scrape out food and discard it. Instead, I would eat as much of the meal as I could with the spoon. Then I would switch to that scraper and I would eat the rest of it with the scraper. When I got done, the pot was almost completely bare. There was like next to nothing left in it. My next step would be to heat up 1 or 2 ounces of hot water in the pot, scrub the sides with a toothbrush. That water was almost completely clean, and that I would pour out. There are a wide variety of small scrapers available to hikers and outdoorsmen. The one on the left, for example, I gave a try, but I found it did not work as well as the thin, sharp one on the right. The thin, sharp nylon scraper works so well, in fact, that I have been able to quite handily lift burnt food off the bottom of a pot. I find that some pots are easier to deal with than others. This one, for example, with the exception of the raised spot at the bottom, is completely smooth on the inside, which helps me scrape the pot clean, and that raised area at the bottom is actually not too difficult to work around. On the other hand, a pot with rivets like this on the inside, or for example, a pot that has measurements stamped into the thin pot wall, I find much more difficult to deal with. Those kind of pots are not my first choice. I find bandanas very helpful in the outdoors, and on the AT I've always carried at least 2 of them. One would be a dry bandana that I use to wipe up sweat. The other one would be a wet bandana. If I came to a creek and my legs and feet were dirty, I would use that wet bandana to clean up. A soaking wet bandana can be wrung out and it will still pick up more water. Along the AT, I've dried myself off after a shower with nothing but a bandana, and it worked reasonably well. There are, of course, a number of commercially available towels made for the outdoors, and most of those should do the job on the AT also. One thing I discovered is that when I sat on rocks, logs, or the ground on the Appalachian Trail, my pants or shorts would get quite filthy in fairly short order. To deal with that, I cut off a small piece of plastic tarp about 20 by 25 inches, and I would always sit on that. It could have been bigger, it could have been smaller, but either way it works. A garbage bag or a piece of a garbage bag probably would work just as well. Some companies sell small pieces of closed cell foam pad that would also do the trick. I always carry spare clothes with me, of course, and views on this may vary, but what I have always tried to do was to avoid using my spare clothes in order to keep them as clean as I could. When I have stopped at a store along the AT or stopped at the rare restaurant near the AT, that allowed me to put on a clean shirt and go inside without being too embarrassed. In warm months, a shirt can be pretty much soaked all the time from sweat, and they can get pretty rank. I would not call it a perfect solution, but many times in the heat I have hiked with no shirt at all. Later on, I cut up what was a synthetic cycling shirt and turned it into a sort of a vest. This at least kept me cooler and prevented the pack straps from chafing on bare skin. I don't think there's really any perfect answer to this, and ultimately I went back to wearing a shirt pretty much all the time. One thing I tried that worked was to carry a small bottle of hand sanitizer, and I would put that hand sanitizer into my armpits, and I would follow that up with some deodorant. That worked quite well, but on the other hand, if a hiker smells a little bit, I think their fellow hikers will pretty much expect that. Probably no item of clothing has the potential to get dirtier than our socks. Some hikers wear gaiters that drape over the socks on the top of the shoes and the boots, and these are designed to minimize dirt getting to the socks. I tried a pair of gaiters once. When I was hiking, one gaiter fell off and I had no idea where it went, and then the second gaiter fell off and I have no idea where that one went. Probably I had a poorly designed pair, but I never tried gaiters again. I have found that dirty socks can be helped quite a bit if I rinse them out at a running stream. Now I don't rinse the dirty water out back into the stream because I'm sure if I did, any water off those socks would make a little guy like this curl up and die. What I do instead is soak them in a stream, carry them to an embankment, and wring them out in the bushes. As I said in another video, I find that black socks dry out much quicker than any other color, so that's my first choice for socks. And I have dried out socks by tying them to the back of my pack or tying them to the trekking pole on the inside of my tarp tent. There are a number of hostels along the Appalachian Trail, and I've stayed at a couple of them, and they're very nice. A hostel is one place where you can really clean up. Some hostels also have washing machines and dryers. It costs some money to stay at a hostel, but the cost is pretty modest, especially if we sleep in our tent outside the hostel, which many of them will allow. Rarely you will find a shower along the Appalachian Trail or near a wooden shelter. When you do find one, the water will be cold and privacy might be limited or non-existent. Not everyone is going to agree with me on this, but I always carry a small plastic trowel on the Appalachian Trail. The rule, of course, is if we take a dump in the woods, we bury our feces. Now, some people insist they can accomplish this without a trowel. I cannot. If I'm going to dig a hole, a trowel will do the job better than anything I might otherwise have. Another reason I carry a trowel is it's just a darn handy thing to have. Once I spent a night at a shelter. At this shelter, the spring was dry. Soon after I got there arrived a man with two of his sons. They had run out of water. One of the sons was diabetic. The father was very concerned that no water was available for his son. We went searching for a stream or a spring somewhere else. We found nothing. To shorten the story, we went back to the shelter. The spring there had in its bottom rocks, leaves, and mud. What I did was I removed the leaves, I removed the rocks, and I started digging with that trowel. After about 30 minutes or so, we had water accumulating in that hole. We used bandanas and shirts to strain that stuff repeatedly until we had water that looked good enough to drink. Some prepared campsites along the Appalachian Trail are so heavily used, you will be camping on what is more or less dirt. I've always carried some kind of extra pieces of plastic to put my gear on in case I pitch my tarp tent at a location like that. And when we are at campsites like that, we can get a lot of mud splashing around in a heavy rain. This shot here shows me pointing out mud that is splashed inside my tarp tent. The edge of that tarp tent was quite close to the ground when that was happening. Even if you are using a commercially made tent, you'll still have a mud splash problem at a location like this. If for some reason I can anticipate rain, my first choice would be to camp in the woods or in the weeds or on the grass where this could be avoided. However, it can't always be avoided, and when it does happen to us, we can turn to our wet bandana when finally the rain stops. Here's one last item. When we are leaving a campsite and we're all packed up, before we go, what we need to do is to search the ground carefully to see if we are leaving anything behind or if we inadvertently dropped anything. Not everyone does this, and I have found things like spoons, a pocket knife, and other handy pieces of camping gear when people fail to do this. So it's a good habit to get into because you don't want to leave behind anything really important, or anything not important for that matter. That's it, we're done. I offer these tips as ideas that might help. I want to thank you for watching, and when you're out there, remember, you're going to get dirty.